Good morning. So my paper is around basically two puzzles. The first puzzle being that the previous literature, both neoclassical and Marxist literature, suggests that with development, the tenant farming should decline. The proportion of area under tenant farming should decline because green revolution will make agriculture more profitable. So, given the Marshallian inefficiency associated with tenant farming, it would be less preferred than owner-operated farming. And you remember that voluminous literature in the 70s and 80s, in the context of model production debate, in the context of agricultural productivity, food production, food policy, there were many efforts to compare the productivity of tenant-operated farming with the owner-operated farming. Many people from the BIDS also participated in it, like Mohammed Sen, Abdullah, and so on. Asaduzzaman and so on. So, and in 1988, according to a nationally rural representative sample survey of 62 villages, they produced a figure around 20% of the land is under tenancy. But over time, we saw that that share did not decline. Not only it did not decline, it increased to 45% in 2014 on the same set of households of 62 villages, according to Mainul and Abdul's two consecutive studies. 2009 study showed also increase between 88 and 2008. The proportion of land under tenancy increased to around 35%, but by 2014 it increased to 45%. So clearly, that begs the question that why it is happening. The second puzzle is that not only the share of land under tenancy has more than doubled in these 3 decades, but also the entry of landless tenancy, they have entered into the tenancy market in a big way. In 1988, only 4% of the tenants were pure tenants, that is landless. And in fact, if you remember, the debate of the time was that whether owner come tenant will prevail or tenant come owner will prevail. That was the big debate. But it was not predicted that the pure tenant, the landless tenant, will enter into in a big way into the land tenancy market. That share has increased from about 9% of total farm household pure tenants to about 23% in 2014. So, landless tenants have not become a vanishing tribe. I'm quoting from a relevant article of that time. The vanishing tribe. It came in a big way. So, what is the reason for that comment? And this graph actually shows the rising importance of area under tenancy, and also, if I have something to show, anyway, so you can see on the graph the area under tenancy are becoming more high-riser building. Similarly, area under landless tenancy is also very high-riser building. So these changes are happening. This is according to the 62 village Okay, so this is the area under tenancy, and this is the percent of tenant farms also highlighted. Then the second puzzle area under landless tenancy is also increased, and also percent as proportion of farms. I give also the bar chart for the non-farm household because my implicit suggestion is that there are two routes for landless mobility. One is through the non-farm development, the becoming non-farm households. Another is to become agriculturalist household through the tenancy market. Third change that has happened at the same time, but it did not constitute the major focus of my paper, is the change of forms of tenancy from sharecropping to fixed rent and mortgage. So nowadays, only 43% or even 42, 43%. 42% of the land under tenancy is cultivated under sharecropping. So that means that around 58% is cultivated either on fixed rental basis or on mortgage basis. And that division is 38% under fixed rent and mortgage is around 20%, which involves mainly cash transactions. So in that sense, Bangladesh has made silent transition from inefficient sharecropping to efficient fixed rental system. Both inefficient and efficient I put under quote. A clear statement on the relative efficiency of the fixed rental system can be seen from the Marshall's discussion in Principle of Economics when he compared the fixed rental system in France as opposed to the sharecropping system in England. Oh, sorry, the reverse. The fixed rental system in England and fixed rental system in France. So what the paper does, that it takes the HIS rounds of 2000, 2010 and 2016 and identify from that data the households that rent out and households that rent in, and try to understand the characteristics of the tenant households and the landlord households. And from the HIS, although the HIS data are not perfectly comparable to the 62 village survey data, it shows basically that those who rent out, those who rent in land is basically landless and functionally landless households. Around 75%, 70 to 75% remaining, that proportion is remaining around stable around 2010 and 16. কি করছেন? আচ্ছা। And for the rented out household, we see the majority of the land giver are from the medium and large households. Mostly more than 80% are. আগে যায় না নাকি পেছনেই যায় শুধু? হ্যাঁ most of the land is given by the land rich household to the land poor household. So there is an equity effect in the distribution of land in the tenancy market. So how I'm going to analyze this, who gives land and who takes land? The analytical framework is that how we can explain the supply of land to the agriculture tenancy market. Supply of land to the agriculture tenancy market can increase, notwithstanding Marshallian inefficiency argument, because of rising importance of non-agricultural incomes for the rich landowners, large and medium-sized landowners. Secondly, it may also increase due to rising supervision cost or monitoring cost in hard labor-based farming due to increased specialization in non-agricultural work. Even if the landlord resides in village, it may be because the non-farm sectors demand so much attention that he cannot give time for monitoring the labor inputs on the part of either hired labor or on the part of the tenants. So that may be the reasons. And also third reasons I speculate that it's possible that because of the demographic decline in the supply of family labor, that many of the previously large and medium landowning households may opt out from direct farming and they may prefer tenancy as an arrangement. So accordingly, in the empirical work, we captured these tendencies by 4 factors. Salaried work, which is a proxy for non-agricultural income; domestic migration and foreign migration, proxy for supervision cost; and availability of male worker, proxy for family labor. And we will see rather shortly that these factors are closely correlated with the likelihood of giving out land in the tenancy market. Then, how do we explain the increased demand for farmland in the agricultural tenancy market on the part of landless households? Remember that the traditional theory predicts that the landless tenants would be cut off from the tenancy market, A, because they lack expertise in agricultural land operations. They have limited financial capital to purchase agricultural inputs that are consistent with Green Revolution technology. They may be constrained also financially to pay upfront the land rent, especially when the rent involves cash. And more importantly, they may be constrained by the lack of complementary non-land assets such as draft power and agricultural pumps that are needed for cultivation. In particular, the draft power and the irrigation inputs would be a big consideration. So the next part, I try to explain quantitatively who takes land. So we run a probit model for explaining the characteristics of the land taker on the basis of 2010, 2000 and 2016. Here we present the results for both 2010 and 2016. I focus particularly on the results for 2016. The results shows, as we discussed, that someone who has salaried job will not go into land tenancy market as land takers, and that is why the coefficient is negatively related. But for landless tenants, somehow who has income access to the domestic remittance or migration income That is significant for the landless tenants. Microcredit access is significantly related for all tenants' likelihood of taking land. So having microfinance organizations, having migration income is an important factor releasing the financial constraint on the part of landless tenants. The other thing is that they lack animal draft power and lack irrigation assets. So how they are going to resolve that problem? Fortunately in Bangladesh, especially after 2000, the spread of mechanized service market has become very prominent. And as a result, even the landless, even female managed households can easily utilize the service of the mechanized service market, power tiller or thresher, and irrigation pumps or irrigation technology, and easily, without owning necessarily these assets, they can avail the services. And that shows that those who have access to irrigation or rented power tiller, tractor, thresher services are very strongly correlated of both for tenants and landless tenants for their likelihood of getting access to the tenancy market. Female headship necessarily discourages, it seems, still, but adult male worker, availability of feminine labor is still an important consideration. And of course, then who gives land to the tenancy market? Here we see the mirror image of the results. People like us who are sitting here are likely to give land to the tenancy market in rural areas. It means that we are involved in salaried work, we are likely to give, and this is significant for all types of landlords, including middle class landlords and rich landlords and the small landlords, but also for large landlords. Those who have access to domestic income are also likely to give land under tenancy. So domestic remittance cuts both ways, in the tenancy. Microcredit does not have any effect. Power tiller and irrigation access will negatively affect on the likelihood. And human capital, those who have more education, they are likely to be involved in non-agricultural activities, and they are less likely to be involved in the agricultural operation, and hence likely to give land under tenancy. So concluding remarks. So increase in the share of cultivated land under tenancy and the unpredictable rise of landless tenants have been brought about by a confluence of several factors that underpin rural structural transformation. That includes spread of education, expansion of regular jobs, urbanization, that is migration income or domestic migration, have encouraged the rented out of agricultural lands on the part of landlord households. On the other hand, growth of microfinance and the rapid development of market for mechanized services have made this phenomenon possible, of landless tenant farming possible on an increasing scale. I would just like to add that we have data on microfinance, that's why we have included, but I suspect that the agent banking and mobile banking have further stimulated this landless tenant farming because of the same reason of releasing financial constraints. So these technological and institutional transformation in the tenancy market are brought about not by decree, that is by land tenure reform, as in West Bengal or in Kerala or in some other places in the globe, but by changing market condition and technological condition. In that sense, they are market-led, not state-led transformation. There seems to be a trend of specialization among the landless households, those who are going into the land tenancy market, having favorable impact on the agricultural wage labor market because they are withdrawing their labor from the agricultural wage labor market and having some kind of effect in raising the real agricultural wage in that market. So it is win-win in that. I do not like that term, but here it is win-win really for the one group of landless tenants or landless families helping other groups of landless families dependent on agricultural labor. In conclusion, the agricultural route of upward mobility via landless tenancy must be recognized as equally potent route as the non-farm route for uplifting the landless households out of poverty. I have cited literature, but the most important missing two gaps in this line of inquiry is to see how this model operates in the context of risk-prone agriculture. Whether because one of the argument of persistence of sharecropping is the sharing of risk, but my hunch is that given the declining rate of risk, declining rate of cost sharing in the tenancy market and rising trend of fixed tenancy, I think the overall risk in agriculture has declined, and that might have acted as a factor. That's one. And the second is that what is the choice of form of payment? I have not delved into this. Cash versus kind, fixed rental versus fixed rental in cash versus fixed rental in kind versus the sharecropping. That issue I have not frontally discussed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Binayak, for your very interesting presentation. As you said, this is a widely researched area, this tenancy market, both nationally and internationally. Internationally, there are the theory of shared tenancy, there is Marshall, there is Newey and Stiglitz and others. And nationally, there is Dr. Mahmoud Hussain, as you mentioned, and also BIDS, Dr. Asaduzzaman has done some work. But you have opened up this topic a bit, I think, particularly in the Bangladesh context, that the landless tenant or pure tenant, who are, the conventional wisdom was that they are not supposed to be here in the tenancy market, but they don't have access to land or other agricultural implements that is necessary. But because of the rural transformation that is availability of microfinance and mechanized services, because there is a highly developed water market now, you can purchase water. So because of this transformation, that the landless laborers now participate in an increasingly fashion in the rural market. Well, I'll have more to say in the concluding part of my remarks. So with these remarks now, let me invite Dr. Kazi Ali Toufique to present their paper that will be authored by three, Kazi Ali Toufique, Kazi Iqbal, and Wahid Ferdous Ibon, on why do Bangladeshi cattle yield high positive returns. Dr. Toufique.
Thank you, Shahabuddin bhai. This is a work I'm doing with Kazi Iqbal and Wahid Ferdous Ibon. We are still presenting, we're not done with the work, and we'll be presenting the preliminary findings, but I think if we revise the estimates, that will not change the main argument of our work. As you see, the title of this work is "Why Do Bangladeshi Cattle Yield High Positive Returns?" So high or low is an absolute term. So the reason we say it is high, it is because it is higher than returns to cattle in India, despite the fact that India is the #1 exporter of meat, and it has one of the, I think, the largest cattle population in the world. Before I go, there is some clarification. I mean, we use the word livestock and cattle to mean both male cows and female cows. There's no such word as female cow. But when we use the word cow, we are referring to the female cow. And when we say bulls or bullock, then we are talking about the male, because it matters a lot in the literature. The rate of return varies by sex. Okay. Now let's get back to where we got the motivation to do the work. In this year and last year, 2017, there has been a series of publications in economic development and cultural change on rate of returns to cattle in India. I mean, in India, if you look, the debate and the issue of cow, the holy cow, has taken a central place. There is a lot of debate whether they have surplus cattle, whether it is useful, or does it make sense economically to have cattle. This kind of debate again resurfaced very lately by these authors, Anagol, Ataniaso, Garke, and Cream. They have found that the negative rate of return has been very extensive in Indian rural context. I mean, in rural India, around 2000, about 41–42% of rural households had cattle. Now the economic question is, if these people have negative rate of return, why are they having livestock? They should have done something else. So in economics, we learn about profitability and rationality. So they kind of question again the big issue why a large number of Indian rural households still have cattle despite these cattle giving them negative returns. So, and they had some explanation. I'm not going to that. They have some typical explanation. But the fact remains that up till now, this puzzle remains a puzzle. There is no easy answer to this question. So what we did is we thought about calculating rate of return for livestock in Bangladesh, and to see whether we also have the same negative returns, because if we have negative returns, then we can make some policy suggestion. We can try to understand why it is similar in South Asia, it's happening in India or in Bangladesh. So that was the motivation, and we're lucky to have the IFRI BIHS data, which is nationally representative at the rural level, and it had a section on livestock. So they had information on various inputs and outputs and value of livestock. So that helped us to calculate the rate of return for livestock in Bangladesh. And this helped us to shred, as I said, on two issues, on livestock issues in Bangladesh, and also we have some understanding about the debate in India. So we could hit two birds with the same stone in this case. Now, the question is why it is relevant for Bangladesh. If the rate of return is negative, as they found in India, then we should seriously question government's livestock development program. It's no point investing money in livestock development. Then again, Bangladesh has a very successful program of asset transfer to the rural poor, particularly female-headed household. They transferred livestock and they could graduate. So if return to livestock is negative, then we can question that kind of policy as well. Despite this politics thing, we surveyed the literature and we saw that there was no rigorous estimate of returns from livestock. They have seen the livestock thing from a very business perspective without looking at the broader issues involved with livestock raising. Okay. So as I said, we use the IFRI data. So this is the sample size. This is a panel data, 2011 and 2015. So we have about 1,000 households for 2011 and about 84 households. We had to drop some households because of incomplete data and some problem with the data, the way it was collected. I will skip few slides. I mean, I present this household characteristic, which is now standard way of doing work. So basically, major findings here are that, cattle owning household, we compare cattle owning household and the household who don't own cattle. They're mainly male-headed household. They have larger family size, things like that. And then we also look at the characteristics of cattle farming, which basically looks at various important indicators such as value of the cattle, things like that. So I'm going to skip that as well. Okay. It is very important to understand the basic logic of estimating returns from livestock. It's very simple. It's very simple. First, you have a livestock, say a cow, because you get milk. You sell the milk. If you have a bull, you get the manure, and you can rent it out for draft power or whatever power, though this market is gradually shrinking because of mechanization. So that's something that you get all the time. Another important value of a livestock is it's like having a share in the stock market. It gives, you can always sell your asset. You can always sell your livestock. And the time period you retain a cow or a bull, its value either increases or decreases depending on the price of that asset. So it's same, the basic principle is same as a share. So for our study, we have also, the return is composed of two components. One is the present value of the livestock you own, the money it will fetch in the market. And the second is the money you get on a regular basis, like milk and other products. Okay, so what we did is, again, I'll skip this. We estimated a CES production function, and we estimated average return and marginal return. So the average return is here. So this delta is the appreciation, and appreciation I've shown that in the formula, and the rest are basically returns and cost. And then you have marginal return here, and this alpha 1 we derive from estimated the function at the bottom. So that gives you the basic parameter estimates to calculate average returns and marginal return. So this is a highly simplified presentation of the quantitative aspect of our study. So I'll go to the results. The first thing that we see is very high appreciation rate. If you look at here, it's around 55%, which means that if you buy a cow or here also bullock for 10,000 taka, next year in 1 year times you can sell it for 15,000 taka. 15,050 if it is 55%. I'll come to that later on, okay. So this is true for both years, though appreciation slightly declined in 2015. The second important result that we got is a widespread positive returns. This is very in sharp contrast to the Indian situation, where in India about 50–60% of the household had negative returns. We found in general widespread positive rate of return. Okay. But we did get some negative returns. For example, for bulls, 30% of the households were having negative returns. But if we consider only milk cow, it is only 11 or 12%. Manage this negative return or the returns, we have a calculation with, well, first we valued the family labor by market wages, and then we did not value the family labor. But we mainly, all this study reported returns assuming that this household labor is free. Then we looked at, since we used the production function approach, we look at the returns by other aspects, for example, by herd size. So we have seen that when you increase herd size, marginal returns still remains positive. In India, it is negative for most ranges of herd size. And only for a small range you can see some economy of scale. I mean, these results are not central to our argument. I'll come to that. But I mean, we could discuss this thing from our findings. The second thing that we got is that poorer households have lower return. This is important finding, because if you see here, so these are quintiles. You know, the bottom quintile is the really household with really poor. We indicate that with per capita expenditure on food. And you see that you have more households percentage-wise having livestock among the poor, but they have larger herd size, but they have lower value cattle. So the cattle they own are of poor quality. And their returns, rate of returns are low. Whereas when you go to the higher per capita expenditure households, they have better quality livestock, and their returns to livestock are also high. Okay, so I'm almost through. So now it was our job to explain why we think returns to cattle was high and positive in Bangladesh. So we propose that this is mainly because of the market for cattle. In India, I mean, these studies, they were based on data state and Andhra Pradesh. The two states have very restrictive slaughtering acts. Now, strangely enough, during partition, the Indian politician could not come to any agreement about slaughtering act. So Nehru was against it. There were lobbying from Muslim politicians, lobbying from Hindu politicians, and they had a series of debate. And to evade the issue, they left it to the state to decide on the slaughtering act. So that has tremendous impact on livestock population in India. I mean, if you look at livestock return, livestock population, there is a cow belt in the north, Haryana, Rajasthan. You can see a mapping between their politics, their slaughtering act, and their livestock development. But I'll not go to that. So what the impact of this thing, for example, I mentioned a few acts, like in both these states, you can't slaughter livestock. You can't slaughter either a cow or a bullock. When a cow can't produce milk, you must retain them. You can't sell it for slaughtering. You can sell it for whatever reason, but that cow cannot be slaughtered. When think about a farmer having a cow, you know, a cow has 5 or 6 lactations period. After that, it can't give you any revenue. It becomes a burden. But according to that law, you can't sell it for slaughtering. Similar law you have in Andhra Pradesh. It's a big difference in AP, in Uttar Pradesh, you can't even own, you can't have beef at home. That's one thing. The second crucial thing is there is serious restriction of movement of cattle within the state and across the state. So a cow or bull born in UP will die in UP because you can't legally transport it out. It is important because this rule doesn't exist in Andhra Pradesh, where there is relatively easy movement of cattle. So that's why they send their cattle when they can't produce milk to Kerala, for example, and nothing much happens. Okay. So the reason I'm saying that is this has tremendous impact on appreciation. So then for example, then a cow becomes like a machine, which a declining depreciation. First year it depreciates by 20%, then again it depreciates by 20%, and when it has the last lactation, maybe fifth or sixth, its value is 0. Okay. So that's the key thing. All these studies assumed very, very negative appreciation. In fact, they use the word depreciation. So I think this is one big difference between Bangladesh and India, because we don't have any stringent slaughtering act. I'm not going to the values. I'm sure one can rationalize that by the religious value and all that, but I'm just looking at the economic impact of that values represented in various state constitutions. So I'll skip. They had real problem with appreciation. They had very roundabout way of estimating appreciation. The second reason we have higher appreciation rate is because it's very related to that. If you talk about cows, for example, it has value for two reasons: one for milk and another for meat. Whereas in India, as I said, in these two states, it has value only for having the quality or attribute of producing milk. So we also think that they have underestimated return because they did not consider the illegal market for cattle. And as I said, the cattle moves from Andhra Pradesh to Kerala, and from Orissa, West Bengal, it used to come to Bangladesh, not anymore in the last couple of years or so, but things might change. The final way of testing whether this has impact is this. We don't have data. If there are states like in the eastern India, Kerala and West Bengal where slaughtering is allowed. So if you estimate rate of return in these states, then you might explain the negative rate of returns in states where it is highly restrictive. Okay. So now we draw some implications for livestock development in Bangladesh. So we think that if this positive return implies that the government had several livestock development programs which we think should be continued. Another puzzle for Bangladesh is if the rate of returns is high, then compared to India, our performance is very poor in terms of productivity of cattle. In fact, it is really, the value comes more from meat than from dairy products. Whereas in India, it is opposite. The value comes from dairy products, from milk. So we compared the price of cattle in India and in Bangladesh. It's almost, in Bangladesh, the price of cattle is about 40% higher, despite being less productive than an average Indian cattle. We consider the dollar value of cattle for Bangladesh and India for 2000, 2001, around that time. So we think that this poor performance comes from supply side factors, which includes poor quality of stock, poor quality of livestock services, shrinking grazing ground. So these are the factors that need attention for livestock development. As I said, if you don't focus on dairying development, it's not really wise to base a sector development totally on the value of meat, which seems to be the case in Bangladesh. Though it doesn't directly follow from our analysis, another finding from the Indian side, which we could not do because we didn't have the data, but there are secondary studies, is that for the hybrid cows, the returns are higher also in India. So that's a paradox, because in India, if you look at the last 30 years or so, their percentage of hybrid cattle is increasing, which means that the debate will vanish if 90% of households have hybrid cattle. So one can easily test the states where you have more hybrid cattle might generate positive rate of return. Okay, the final point that we're making is in Bangladesh, the livestock data is very poor. I mean, they don't even produce data on male cows and female cows. So nobody can give an answer of how many female cows are there and male cows are there in Bangladesh. That ratio is very important. For example, in India, the male cow is falling historically, and there are many restrictions on slaughtering. Whereas in Bangladesh, we don't know. But secondary data says that it varies a lot in Bangladesh. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kazi Ali Toufique, for your illuminating presentation. Most probably, this is the first of its kind, the estimation of rate of return on cattle in Bangladesh, to the best of my knowledge. And you have also given plausible explanation why this rate of return is both high and positive in Bangladesh, but low and negative in India. I have a few questions, but you don't have to respond now. And I'll come back again. Because in the, you have used both the production function and profit function approach. And CS function you have used, I know that Cobb-Douglas is a log linear. By taking log, you can convert it to linear function. But CS production function is non-linear in parameters. So it is very difficult to transform into by taking log in a linear function. So I'm a bit puzzled how you could have managed it. You don't have to respond now, you can respond later. And my second question is page 9. This is maybe my lack of understanding. What are the results? You say 40% for average and marginal return. You have done it for 2011 and 2015. You said 40% for cows and 8% for bullock. Are they average return or marginal return? And again, you did it for 46% for cows and 50% for bullock. But you didn't. But if it's average and marginal return, you should have 4 figures for each year rather than 2 figures. So again, I'm a bit puzzled about results and not result, but presentation of results. I think these are too few comments. I think I'll come back to it again while making my concluding remarks. So let us now move to the next paper, I think, which is assessing competition in onion market in Bangladesh. It is written by Nazneen, Ahmed, and Mainul Hoque. And I think, am I correct?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, distinguished guests. This is a study actually commissioned by Competition Commission of Bangladesh. So they approached Dr. Nazneen Ahmed, my colleague, and then we jointly conducted this study. And this is basically a rapid assessment in the face of very high price increase during the first quarter of 2018. We all know that the per kg onion price go up by around 100 taka per kg around that time. So that was really volatile period for the onion price in the market. So as the title suggests, we will mainly look into the competition, like who are the actors in the market and what are their roles, mainly starting the supply chain, and then through the notion of competition, perfect competition, we will look into the the indicators like whether the market structure is competitive. And finally, trying to understand why the prices vary a lot and if we can find any systematic pattern into this. So to conduct this, we exploit both primary and secondary data. The primary data mainly comes from BBS, Bangladesh Bank, FAO, and Department of Agricultural Marketing. And then we surveyed in three onion growing districts in Bangladesh, Rajshahi, Pabna, and Faridpur. And we also surveyed Dhaka city markets. And because Dhaka is the main consumption hub of the economy, so both growing region and non-growing regions were covered. And like 5 markets, at least 5 markets from each of the region has been covered. So we try to interview actors in each stage of the supply chain. And we also interviewed some importers and related persons, like the custom officials in 2 major ports of Bangladesh, land ports, Hili and the Shona Masjid land port. These are the 2 of the main ports through which onion enters in Bangladesh from India. So 3 instruments have been used: farmer's instrument, enterprise survey, and importer's instrument, to understand different fundamentals of the onion market. And although we surveyed like 275 individual entities, major portion, like 75%, is actually at the intermediate stage, because there is wide perception that these intermediate stage traders make abnormal profit and they are the main culprit for any sort of price volatility. So we mainly focus on them. And the question we start with is, how important is onion in our consumption basket? It looks like per family, onion consumption varies. It's like 2.5 kilogram to 3 kilogram a month. And it varies by month across the year. And also, like, there is a variation across regions. We don't know the reason, but it seems like Sylhet region systematically consumes more onion per household. And expenditure share is actually not that high. It's if we look by consumption expenditure decile, in the lower decile is like 1.6%, whereas it's only around 1% in the top decile. And if we look into the production and import, we see that 30%, approximately 25% to 30%, is made by import. And that means major proportion of the total onion supply comes from the domestic sources. And onion mainly produced in Pabna, Faridpur, Rajbari, Rajshahi. These 4 districts altogether supply like 75% of the, around 75 to 80% of the total onion supply in the country. And this pattern is like the pattern by the major district. This is almost consistent across year. And when we compare the onion productivity in Bangladesh with other countries in the world from FAO data, we see that Bangladesh's productivity per acre is really low. Even compared to India, the neighboring country, is like 65% lower. So as we compared with India, because India is the major onion import source for us, and we import like 80% of our total yearly import from India. Rest of the like 19 to 20% comes from China. Other sources are really occasional and not that very significant. So let's start by looking into the prices. We see that the monthly retail prices of onion and wholesale prices, these are for the local, they move together, the prices move together. And same pattern is consistently observed for imported onion as well. The retail and wholesale prices move together. And then if we look into across the growing region and the consumption hub, we see that the wholesale and retail prices, they also move together. All these suggest that there is some strong correlation between these 2 prices as expected. And when we conducted some statistical time series analysis, we find that they are co-integrated. So one of the implication of the co-integration is that since there are no natural barriers in trade within country, across regions, or across the vertical stages, say from wholesale to retail stages. Next, we look into the supply chain, like we start with Faridpur. Like any other perishable commodities, the onion goes from farmers to Foria Bepari, and then they go through Arodhar and commission agent to retailer and consumer. Interestingly, in Faridpur, the market we surveyed, we didn't find that many wholesalers there, though there is a wholesale price reported in the DAM data, but they say that it's mainly in those markets we interviewed, it's mainly the retailers. The role of imported onion is not that strong in Faridpur, and occasionally they sell the imported onion. And the other district, especially the growing district, they procure onion from Bepari and the Arodhar and commission agent. And pattern in Pabna and Russia is a little bit different, is because in Faridpur we didn't find evidence that farmers sell to Bepari. The role of Foria is strong there. But in Russia and Pabna we find that Bepari directly procures from farmers. And other way is almost similar, except that there are strong role of wholesalers. When you look into Dhaka, the major market is the Shambazar. So we find that the traders in Dhaka, especially the Arodhar and commission agent, they procure from the growing districts, and also they procure from the commission agent with the imported onions. And we see that the commission agent, they are actually assuming multiple roles. I mean, they are assuming the role of Arodhar as well as sometimes they are wholesaler. So they are assuming multiple roles, and there is trade from wholesaler to retailer and from commission agent and wholesaler to the retailer. And this Shambazar actually fits into the other market in Dhaka city. So the role of Shambazar is, especially for onion, the role of Shambazar is really significant. When we look into Kauran Bazar, we find that same procedure. They procure from growing district and also from the local market, Shambazar. But we find that in Kauran Bazar, there are like very few importers. There are some commission agents who just sell the commission imported onions. But in Shambazar, we find that there are commission supply both imported onion and locally grown onion. In small markets, some markets like Maulvi Bazar, which is a neighboring market to Shambazar, we find that the structure is more simpler. The wholesaler in Maulvi Bazar just procures from the commission agent and Arodhar in Shambazar, and then they sell it to retailer and consumers. We interviewed the land port. The finding is that there are approximately 30 to 40 constant onion importer present in those markets, but there are seasonal variation. It can go up to like 350 importers. It depends on the season. And the capital requirement for import varies from 5 to 150 million based on the size of the importers. They are very experienced. They have 5 to 27 years experience. And most of the import takes place during September to December. And actually, which is the lean season and coincides with the plantation season of onion. The payment at the port is not that high. It's only 500 taka per truck on average. It takes on average 15 days to ship a consignment from India to Dhaka on average, ranging in 9 to 21 days. So they say that the main problem is the storage facility. So because of the weather condition, and sometimes it takes too much time in the Indian side of the port, they say that it's 3 to 4 days it takes in the Indian side, while it takes only 1 day in the Bangladesh side on average. So this extended period of waiting time sometimes led them to face losses. And that's actually reported by the importers in those two land ports. So let's look into the margin. When we find that the margin is high for growers, which is approximately around 44%. For others, commission agent and Arodhar is around 9.5%. For others, it's like around is less than 10%. But when we split it by market, we find that the traders in Shambazar, see the commission agent, Arodhar and wholesaler, they make like 27.3% is their margin. For growers, it's 33% and 54.8%. But we find that we have like only 20 farmers have been interviewed. And we find that there are some items in their margin, in their cost that has not been included, like their opportunity cost and the family labor. We didn't incorporate those things, and the rent of their own land. So there is some noise in the measure for the grower's margin. Most of the upstream traders, as expected, the Foria Bapari, they are located in the growing region, whereas the other traders intermediate stage who are linking the growing market to the consumption market, they are mainly located in the major cities, including Dhaka, Chittagong, and Bogura. And we find that the average number of traders per market is high in the upstream sectors, like the Bapari per market and Foria per market is high. So when we asked the question, so it was not possible for us to count down the number of traders in each market. So we asked the interviewer asked the traders who have been surveyed about the number of the traders in the market. We find that in general the number is high, and again is higher in the upstream like Bapari, Arodhar, and also at the downstream retailer in the intermediate stage is like around 60 to 100. And predominantly in most of the markets we interviewed, they are predominantly dominated by medium and small size farm. Number of traders more or less in the downstream is high, and in most of the cases these traders, they actually trade in several commodities, so the basket is diversified. They are not only selling or trading on onion, it's like multiple commodities. When we ask about entry and exit, there is entry is stronger, but exit is not that consistent. And we find that in Russia there is some evidence of exit, but we could not find out like whether these exits have been due to loss or because of the seasonality. Because during the peak season, a lot of these traders enter the market, and after that probably they exit. So average, we asked about the average capital required just to understand how whether capital is can be a constraint. We find that for other commission agent and wholesaler who are assuming those roles, it take them like 1.5 million at least to enter the business, whereas for other like for Bapari, wholesaler and retailer is less than 0.2 million. And for price determination, we look into like if there is any constraint for prices in getting prices. We find that farmers' prices are determined after harvest, because in many cases traders lock in the farmers by paying in advance, and we didn't find any evidence of that. And they avoid the traders, they actually exploit multiple sources. They not only talk to their traders in their own market, they also exchange some telephone communication to get the prices in other markets and other region. And price is determined mostly by bargaining, and it's not we didn't find evidence that commission agents are actually controlling the trading or the bargaining between the commission agent and the Bapari. Is the other way. The Bapari asks the price, and probably then they go through the bargaining process. So there is clear evidence of transaction in credit in both Dhaka and Russia and Pabna, but the evidence is thin in Faridpur. So the transaction takes place through credit, and there is repayment period from 2 to 11 days. And but this credit is at the cost of some differentiated price. If they get credit, they have to sell it at some predetermined prices. So there is some role of relationship and trust. And when we ask them about their association with different traders association, we didn't find any evidence, because there is not many traders association exist even within a market. So if we sum up, we find that prices are vertically and spatially co-integrated. There are significant number of buyers and sellers. Entry into the market is not prohibitively costly at the most cases. Traders mostly sell local and imported onion, which are almost homogeneous. In most cases, the market margin is consistent with the opportunity cost of capital, except few cases like traders in the Shambazar, intermediate traders. But see, they are assuming multiple roles and the risk is also very high because they are assuming this risk and they are assuming multiple roles, their return can be high. And there is a recent paper by DeLeon and Dambro in AGE 2017, which is saying that most of the people just seeing the margin, they comment that probably there is some unscrupulous activities, but which may not be the case. It depends on the risk absorbed by the trader. And there is evidence of long experienced trader with the high prevalence of credit transaction in the onion market. But probably this is required to survive in the market, and there is some return in the onion market from this experience and market knowledge. And we didn't find any role of traders association. So in most of the cases, we consider these are consistent with the notion of perfectly competitive market. But then why do the prices vary? We think that the price can vary even if there is a competitive market. The prices can vary, and whether the question is whether there is a systematic pattern. We think that the local demand, especially when we have Eids and other celebration, the demand is high, price goes up. Same is true for production seasonality. During the harvesting, the price goes down, and during the lean season goes up. If there is any shocks from the trading countries, price can go up, and expectation as expected may have the role through the demand and supply shock. So we see that during the Eid, consistently price increases, especially during the Eid ul-Adha. During the harvesting time, price goes down, but during the lean season, systematically price grows up. And then we look into the role of Indian export ban or minimum export price imposed by India on onion, and we find that whenever there is a ban imposed, the price suddenly goes up. So a simple, we have 4 prices in India and Bangladesh, 4 regions in India, and we find that the prices are really co-integrated, and these things shows that we analyze their data from 2006 to 2018. When we see the ban, the impact of ban, we see that right on the day of the ban, the retail and wholesale prices goes by approximately 30% in Bangladesh. But we didn't find similar pattern for ban removal. So we see that most of the cases of volatility in onion prices is related with this systematic pattern and the ban or trade restrictions by the neighboring country. And probably the traders are not doing much there, and that's our conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mainul Hoque, for your interesting presentation. Now, most of the, I think, studies on agricultural commodities are on cereals, like rice and wheat, with the exception of 2 studies, one on eggplant and potato, I think done by Dr. Mushir and others a few years earlier. So I think your studies adds value to the assessment of competition in the agricultural commodity market in the country. And you have followed a traditional approach, the value chain analysis and the estimation of margin in each stage of the chain. And I'm not surprised that you found that the onion market fulfills most of the precondition of a competitive market. I have just one comment, you don't have to respond, I think, about the competitive market does not mean that there is no fluctuation or high episode of prices. And you mentioned quite a few: local demand, production seasonality. But about supply shocks, you only mentioned the trading shocks, the shocks in the Indian market where we import most of the onions. But there can be production shocks in the domestic market due to natural disaster. And since most of the supply comes from domestic market, I thought this should have mentioned. Okay, now last but not the least, we have Dr. Asaduzzaman to present his paper on telltale signs from recent BBS survey on changes on female mobility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, panelists, fellow academics, and ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to you all. Mine is perhaps, it's not yet a paper, it's a prelude to a paper, hopefully in the future. And the shortness of what I am going to say perhaps belie the very long-term implications in terms of development and welfare in this country. So please bear with me for a few minutes. The issue that I am trying to raise is whether women are becoming more mobile in the income scale and physical mobility. On the basis of the very recent Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics surveys and some of the findings, it seems that perhaps they are becoming more so. If we look at those figures, the recent labor force survey 2016 and the Haque survey of 2016-17 indicate perhaps this is happening. No definitive analysis is possible yet because we yet do not have the unit records of the surveys. When we do have, and if there are variables, information which may be related with the basic conclusion, perhaps we would be able to give more definitive answers. If not so, perhaps some kind of conjecture based on the other surveys and secondary information. Now what we find is that women's labor force participation has slightly risen over time. And the sector of employment still remains basically largely agriculture, but comparatively far more than men. Men are more diversified in terms of their occupational characteristics. And we find that even within this unchanged situation overall, there are certain things which are happening. One is that the women seems to be physically more mobile in a sense than men, even in rural areas. And secondly, the poverty incidence among the female-headed households seem to be now lower than the male-headed household, where previously our usual conventional wisdom had been so far that the female-headed households are poorer than the male-headed household. So let's look at the evidence that I have just said. One is the trend in the labor force participation rate. As I have said, the female labor force participation rate, particularly in the rural areas, seems to be rising somewhat. And this is one of the things that I have observed back almost in 2010, almost 8 years back. And then if we look at the sector of employment, as I have said, for women, agriculture still remains the main area where they are employed. But then the two things that I have just stated, the changes that are taking place. Women, particularly in the rural areas and also in the urban, of those who are employed, the greater percentage are migrants. Why this is so, that I don't know. As I have said, that this perhaps indicates some kind of physical mobility of them, but why, that we don't know. If we look at the poverty incidence by sex of household head and the type of poverty, both for the lower bound of poverty and the upper bound of poverty, for both we find that the female-headed households seems to be less poor than the male-headed household. As I have told you, these are only telltale signs of some perhaps bigger things that are happening within the society. And if these hold over time, the issue of women's empowerment, both in economic terms and in other terms, may be perhaps having a much more positive sign than before. Why, as I have told you, we don't know. But in the morning, the chief guest made an observation which may be interesting in this context. He made the observation that the issue of women's not working outside home was not so much culturally determined perhaps. It was determined more by the demand for labor as the economy grows. As we have almost an 8% rate of growth, and if over time we can maintain it or even surpass it, that would mean there would be much greater demand for labor, and the women must come out of their households to fulfill that demand for labor, supplying the labor or the women's labor more for satisfying that demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Asaduzzaman, for your interesting presentation, I should say. Although I yourself claimed or mentioned that these are no definitive answer to the question that you have raised, that women are becoming more mobile along the income scale and physically mobile as well. But unit record data is needed for answering this question. I have only one question. That is this upward mobility of women along the income scale and the physical mobility, are they correlated or not? And if so, why so? If not, why not? Thank you. With this, I think the presentation is completed. Now we have two distinguished discussions, designated discussions. First, I'll invite Dr. Mohammed Helal Uddin, Associate Professor, Department of Economics, Dhaka University. Is 10 minutes enough? Hello? Okay, let's try. But we'll get minimum 10 minutes. Okay. Oh, by the way, Dr. Helal, you may choose to comment on all the papers, but then you can choose to comment only one paper, and maybe a combination of both. So it's up to you. But the time limit is 10 minutes.
I was told for one, but
okay, that's right.
I'll try to comment on 2 minutes. Thank you, respectable chair, for giving me this opportunity. Honorable guest. Initially, I was told to discuss one paper, so I was prepared for one, and later I had the second paper for discussion. So I'll focus on the competition paper in onion market. The conclusion is very robust conclusion that there is no anti-competitive practice or it's a competitive market. So to link my discussion with their analysis, I will just go over a couple of lines that you all know, maybe you know, how it is done, assessment of competition in standard economic literature. So we can determine whether a market player is exercising market power, setting its price over its cost, given price and marginal cost. But unfortunately, we usually do observe only price, not and factors that are related to price, demand shifts or supply shifts. We do not have explicit information on individual firms' marginal cost. So one approach to overcome this problem is to estimate the firm's behavior or the average behavior of all firms in an industry, at the same time marginal cost. Again, we don't have marginal cost, so what we do is like we use average cost instead of marginal cost, then we don't get markup. What we get is like profit margin, average profit margin in an industry. I think that is the approach of the paper I'm discussing now. The authors have estimated average profit margin for players in different layers of the onion supply chain. Now, theoretically, to conclude on the structure of the market, we need a competitive benchmark. Without this benchmark, the average profit margin tells us nothing about if there is a competition or not. And this is the limitation of the paper, needs to be addressed, that I will explain. Margin differs across layers, but it says nothing about the state of competition in different layers. I know that 40% in case of producers, 27% in like some shampoo. So I don't want to conclude on like whether calculation is overstated or not, exaggerated or not. That's not my effort. So if we don't know marginal cost, as I said, like if we don't have any benchmark, then how do we do it? So in the literature, like alternative to this is like there is a reduced form or non-parametric approach based on comparative statistics properties of structural models. The alternative approach determines market power by seeing how price varies with shifts in cost or factors that shifts cost. To illustrate, suppose that firms face a constant marginal cost. A shock causes the marginal cost to rise. If the market is competitive, then the price will increase no more than the amount as the marginal cost, because P equal to MC. However, if the market is not competitive, price may change more than the change in the marginal cost. The exact change will depend on the demand elasticity of the product. If there is magnified transmission of incremental cost, then we can examine the layers of the supply chain to pinpoint the exact non-competitive layers. So first thing we have to find out, is there any magnified impact of cost shift or incremental cost? The motivation for this study, as I understand, came from a sudden surge in onion prices for a couple of weeks, a few months back. There was a suspicion of collusive behavior in onion markets. If this is so, we can still utilize estimated profit margins to detect such collusive behavior even in a quasi-competitive or competitive industry. So even if this is a competitive industry, there can be some collusive act and there can be sudden surge in prices. But the approach will be slightly different than what is in the paper. We need to test if there is a significant high profit margin during suspected collusive period or not. So if I think that there is a collusive act for 2 months, then we need to look at the profit margins for our previous periods and also like after this collusive period. Then we can see if there is a significant, statistically significant difference in profit margins for the suspected collusive period. If not, then we cannot say that there is a collusive act there. Now, as I mentioned, they can still use the profit margins, but they need to do like phase by phase the change in the collusive period, suspected collusive period. In this paper, they have mentioned like there is a discussion in the paper about price volatility. Actually, price volatility is generally high in case of perfect competition, competitive market, than non-competitive one. Sometimes like government policy on price stabilization can reduce volatility too. So less volatility is not a signal of competitive market. Any shock in Indian market is transmitted quickly to onion market in Bangladesh. That's the claim in the paper, and that's right. But the question is like, quick transmission means what? Is it magnified transmission? Is there asymmetry in transmission in terms of magnitude and quickness? It could be that there is an increase in price in Indian market and quick increase in prices in Bangladesh market. And there is a 10% increase there, but here is like 15%, 20% increase. So is this a magnified? And it can be that when there is a rise in Indian market, immediate rise here. But when there is a fall in Indian market, very gradual decline in Bangladesh market. So it's an asymmetric transmission in terms of time and also in terms of magnitude. There is a 10% decrease in Indian market, but here is a slow decrease, but by 7-8%. Still, it can say that market is not that smooth competitive market. That's what I have tried to say about the competition market, competitiveness, and obviously in a very competitive market, as I said, there can be collusive act. Now there can be a question like, if they can raise the prices for 1 month, keep it high for 1 month, why not for the entire month? So entire year. It depends on the structure of the market. If they want to keep it high for long period, then prolonged period, then what happens? We have domestic production. We get 70% supply from local market. So farmer will increase their production. There will be matching supply in coming days. Or like, since we can import from India, so in couple of weeks we can see increased import from India. That's why, like, even in a competitive behavior all around the year, we can see collusive act for 1 month, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. So the conclusion from that paper that everything is fine or there is a competitive market, well, it seems it's a competitive market, but still there can be collusive act. Now, on the second paper, it's a very interesting paper, and Binayak was very comprehensive. But still, to link it analytically with the derivations, I just picked up one equation from Holstrom-Milgram. There is one paper. So there is one formula. It's like, I know there is one theoretician sitting over there. So here is a formula for different contract. Modality. So in this formula, like. S is the share, that means if S is 0, that means fixed wage contract. If S is 1, is fixed rental contract. And if S is in between 0 and 1, so it's a sharecropping contract. So the modality of the contract depends on 3 factors here, is like variability of production and degree of risk aversion of the tenant, and also like effort or monitoring cost. These are the parameters. And along with this, like it can be that if there is a high variability in production, and the tenant is very marginal and he doesn't like variation, then obviously they will not go for fixed rental. They will go for sharing. But the question is like, if an agent or tenant is risk neutral, he doesn't mind with variation, but still if he faces wealth constraint, because for fixed rental, he needs to pay upfront the rental. If he have wealth constraint, then what happens? Even though these 3 parameters say that it should be a fixed rental, but there will be sharecropping because of wealth constraint. That's what came in this paper, that one of the arguments of this paper is that the wealth constraint is relaxed for various reasons, like microcredit and other reasons, factors. I agree with that. Another argument is that variability in output is reduced and the quality of input has increased due to mechanized and other factors. Even though it's not spelled out, that it's the variation in production is reduced, but the overall discussion, it kind of signals that in raw structure there is some kind of reduction in variation in output. And in terms of degree of risk aversion, obviously degree of risk aversion is reduced due to diversification in income sources. We know that non-agriculture income sources are increasing. So the factors mentioned in this paper, I agree with all of them, but estimating the relative importance of these factors may be more contributory and interesting. All this speaks for reduction in sharecropping in favor of fixed rental, since there is a substantial withdrawal of land owners from cultivation for various reasons. Obviously, the vacuum has to be fulfilled by landless tenants. So there is no surprise. It has to happen. In paper like conclusion, like however in 2016, access to foreign remittances seem to be encouraging renting out on the part of landlord households. remittance receiving households may be more biased towards non-agricultural sectors in terms of household labor allocation. It is like someone used to work in agriculture, now lives in Middle East. So you have to rent out part of the land. So if you like take it in estimation, that then there will be some indigeneity problem, I guess. And also like here, like access to domestic remittances can have different meanings for landlord and tenants. For landlords, it can encourage renting out land. However, for tenants, it can serve as a source for agricultural finance. Do they both have lever to work in agriculture? Like in the paper, like salaried job, less likely to be a tenant. But the question is, if that household has only working person and doing a salaried job, so there is no question of going to this or that. So when we are running a profit regression, I need to see what are the options they have. So I would say like, however, here it can be considered as the risk diversifying drive for tenants, which is likely to induce them toward fixed rental tenancy. And last policy implication, like the paper mentioned, like change in fixed rental versus change sharecropping. So half of sharing of output creates inefficiencies. One example that I've seen in my village life, it's like intense competition for a parcel of land which is highly productive, contrary to no demand for a low productive or less fertile land. But with fixed rental, what happens? One landlord can customize rental parcel wise. For each of the parcel of land, they can set different rentals. Now, through these customizing rentals, it seems that they can extract growers' surplus, depending on their weak bargaining power. That's why, like when government are taking different programs, like targeting like landless or marginal farmers, the question is subsidized program may help landowners to extract higher rentals. To say it. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Helal, for your interesting comments. I think the author will perhaps would like to respond to at least some of them. But then we have another discussion, I think. Dr. Samiul Hoque is Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, North-South University. I think since Dr. Helal has exceeded the time limit, so I shall impose some restriction on you. It will be 10 minutes, okay?
Shagatom. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this occasion. So I'll speak about the first paper which was presented here by Dr. Sen. I think that this is a very interesting paper, if I understood your motivation right, and you can correct me as I'm saying. You're trying to explain why a greater proportion of the cultivated land has been going towards landless tenants, right? So their share has been increasing over time, whereas the expectation was, according to at least neoclassical theory, that, well, these people will at the end of the day die out, right? Okay, so that's a great question, and that's a great stylized fact in order to try to answer. It's a first order question about the world, so I think that this paper is very well motivated. That being said, I would draw your attention to what you are actually doing. Empirically, you are estimating probit models, and your dependent variable, I assume, is a 0-1 binary on whether you rent or not, correct? Okay, so if those assumptions are correct, then the way I'm interpreting your result, at least what your results are telling you, is basically what are the factors which determine the probability of renting in and renting out. That's it. That's all it is telling us here. It's simply talking about correlations, but it is not talking about the structural change deep inside the economy that's happening that led to, I believe, from landless tenants simply renting, their share being 30% at one point in time, I believe, to becoming more than 58% or something like that. Right? It's not telling us why that's happening. It's simply telling us what factors lead to renting out, right? And what factors lead to leasing in. But it's not really answering the first order question, and that's an amazing question to ask that you pose in this paper, but it's not telling us why this structural shift is taking place. So I think that's my fundamental comment and criticism, if I may have, about this paper. And if you can address it, that would be great. I mean, one thing that I'm thinking about is that there are probably deep structural changes that's happening within Bangladeshi economy, particularly in the non-ag sector. Probably there is improvement in productivity and real wages that's probably drawing out labor out of ag. And as people move out of ag, so I'm basically referring to a partial equilibrium setup, there's a bunch of land which is being freed out. And what happens to this land? That's probably being rented out. And you are trying to explain those renting out behavior and renting in behavior by various factors, but you are not explaining the deep structural change that's driving this result. So that's sort of my comment, criticism, all packaged into one long statement. Moving on.
Are you going to comment on all the papers?
Really, 2 or 3.
There is no time, much time.
Okay, I'll comment on the onion paper in one sentence, okay? So to comment about, or to be able to talk about competition in any market, you need to have a micro-theoretical model, and you need to conduct structural estimation and back out conduct and structure parameters. If you do not do that, then that's not a paper that addresses competition in any market. So I would suggest that the title of this paper either be renamed or the actual structural estimation be done to assess competition in the onion market. My time is over?
No, 2 more minutes.
I have 2 more minutes. Okay.
Another paper.
Dr. Toufique, I mean, I don't have much criticism. It's just I have a bunch of confusions about the notation, but I'm sure we can address this during an informal chat. So I'll call it a day. Thank you for giving me your time.
Thank you, Dr. Samiul, for your interesting comments. And now I think we have, the organizers have told me that to close this session 1:15, we have about 25 minutes, I think, 15 and 10. Yeah. So the floor is now open. So I'll take selective questions, I think, given the constraint imposed by time. Yeah, please, I don't know all of you, I know some of you very well. So please introduce yourself and make comment, but very brief comment. Yeah, please. You can sit down, yeah. There is a mic, yeah, no problem, yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Chairman. This is Dr. M.D. Monwar Karim Khan, Member Director, Bangladeshi Agriculture Research Council. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me at this August seminar or workshop. I also like to thank all the presentations for their excellent presentations. I am very much pleased to see so many presentations and so nice presentations. I have some queries and questions to 2 presenters only. I don't want to elaborate much. Firstly, Dr. Kazi Ali Toufique. So you have very rightly mentioned that poor households have lower return, but at the same time, you mentioned that proportionately more poor households raise livestock. The poor households are raising more livestock, but they are getting less return. Why it is the situation? This is very alarming to me, because we are trying for the elevation of poverty. If it happens, then it is really alarming. And another, high positive, you told that this is quite natural. If you get much return, then we will go for cattle farming. That's quite natural. There's no need to mention. But very important is that we have now self-sufficiency in food production, but we are looking for nutrition security. For nutrition security, cattle production is very important. This should be mentioned. And another thing is very lacking. In Bangladesh, we don't have any insurance for the cattle farming. That is very important for us. Poor farmers are becoming poorer because they don't have cattle insurance. These are the things to you. And for the presentation, assessing cooperation in onion marketing of Bangladesh, Dr. Nazneen Ahmed. You have mentioned a part of the whole scenario of onion production to consumption. Onion only marketing does not mean anything, but still it's okay.
I don't get you. What you said?
He has only mentioned one part of the whole scenario of onion. Suppose onion, from the production to consumption, this is a V chain. Okay. He has mentioned only the marketing chain. Marketing part of the whole chain.
That was the purpose of the event?
Yes, I know. That does not explain the whole things. If you don't know why onion marketing, if you go for marketing, you have to know the production first. You have to know why the production is less. You have to know why we use small onions, why not big onions, go for big onions. These are the things we have to consider before you go for marketing. In Japan, in the USA or Europe, they are producing very big onions and the yield is very high. Still, we are not going for that. Why? Because our market doesn't like this. Not that we cannot produce it. Even we can produce, we cannot get it in our country. We cannot sell it in our country. Okay. Anyway, and I would like to know why the production in Bangladesh is so less. Is it due to soil property? It is due to varietal variation? Is it due to environmental difference in environment? So these are the things I would like to know if you can. Another, during the festivals, maybe the onion production or the price of onion becomes very high. How to combat it? How to overcome this situation? We should have some recommendation or answer for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Nurul Alam. In fact, I teach in the university. I have just no comments, but some observation on Dr. Binayak Sen's paper. First of all, let me say that I should thank Binayak to bring an issue যেটা নাকি হারিয়ে গিয়েছিল, to bring this issue on the table. So thanks, Binayak. But what I was wondering when you were talking about landless tenancy, you didn't mention about the cost of how the cost is shared and the cost of production. Because agriculture nowadays has become very costly. So if a tenant is a landless tenant, then I was wondering from what source he's managing his capital. Is this from his own source or borrowing or microcredit or from any other source? So I think that sharing of the cost is very important. I can tell you just in one sentence, several years back, I made a cost calculation of the owner cum tenant, owners, and the landless tenants. And I found that the sharing is very important. If a landless tenant share whatever is 1/3 or half, then I found that it's a kind of a negative return from the landless tenants. So I think I was wondering whether you can throw some lights on that. Okay. And I'll say that Asad Bhai's paper is very thought-provoking. But what I was wondering, in fact, he said that this may be happening. You are speculating that this is happening or this has happened. say, one point you say that poverty incidence of the family-headed household seems to be far lower than for male-headed households. This is really significant. So what I was wondering, whether you have any information, you have any narratives to support this strong statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Retired former additional secretary to the Ministry of Commerce. Actually, sir, I requested Nazneen Appa to invite me here to share some experiences of the onion crisis in 2013. That's my interest here. In August 2013, sir, suddenly due to a lower production in India, actually India raised its minimum export price very high. And there was a crisis in Bangladesh, serious crisis. How governments have managed it. That's my actually, sir, we first discussed with the business people, but there was no responses from them. Prices going higher. Government to take two ways. One is to actually basically policy intervention, and that to directly intervene in the market. The policy intervention, fiscal policy, we make zero all the duties, custom duties, regulatory duties, supplementary duties, but there is no actual response. Then we go for monetary intervention. We reduced the LC margin. We request the Bangladesh bank for easy access to credit, but there was no improvement. There was no import even. Then actually we facilitate that the ports will work 24 hours a day, 7 days of a week. There will be no jam of transports carrying onions, ever. Even then, the situation did not improve. We wanted to have open market sale. But to whom? What is the agency of the government? From the 1990s, sir, I think in the name of structural readjustment or open market economies region, we actually captivated all the state-owned agencies like TCB, BIDS, and Water Development Board. When we ask the TCB that you start OMS, sir, we haven't the capacity. They are lacking in physical facilities, no go downs, no offices outside the even divisional office, no financial resource. We have to lend from the banks, having a permission from the finance ministry to LRT. They haven't the human resources. All the expert human resources were sent to their home having golden shake hands. Those who are actually staying there, it's not efficient. And the deputed officials from the government, basically they are not the managers. There was a huge crisis, what we will do?
Okay, that should be all.
That's all, but
The 1 minute. Yeah.
Just 1 minute, sir. Now, to make this competition easier, while the business is staying back during the crisis, even at that time, businesses requested or placed demand to the government, you government, you import. So, when we are talking about open market economy, when it is the responsibility of the business and the government to arrange quality goods and services at competitive price to its consumers, then how this can happen? That's the thing, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I think I should invite at the back, I think, Shahabuddin first and then you. I think that's right. Shahabuddin? Yeah.
Thank you. My question is directed at Binayak's very interesting paper on agrarian change, one particular aspect. If I understood Dr. Sen rightly, his point is that these changes have come about not because of state interventions, but because of the market, and in that sense are market-led changes. Now I mostly agree with the argument that these are not state-led changes, particularly in terms of provision of credit. Though one should remember that the first microcredit institution in Bangladesh, the Grameen Bank, was actually funded by the state before the international donors moved in with the NGOs. The second point is that even if it is not the state, and we are talking about microfinance institutions, are we really talking about markets in a full sense? One has to think of the political economy on a world scale, which has led to the NGOization of development and the propelling of microcredit, and whether this can be regarded as purely market forces. If you think of De Soto, the Peruvian economist, De Soto's point about the fungibility of land, that applies to people who have land which is not being used. It doesn't apply to those who do not have land but have other assets. And that role has been fulfilled by microcredit in the sense of bringing out the non-commoditized labor and other non-land resources of the poor. And this is where the role of microcredit fits into the international political economy. This also links with the comment made by one of the discussants about the deep structural factors which have been moving the changes in agrarian structure, to which Dr. Binayak Sen so ably has drawn our attention. But I think it is important that we go beyond simple dichotomies of the state and the market to look at the actual institutional forces, and also that we take the trouble of distinguishing between simply the credit market as it appears on the surface and the forces propelling microcredit on a world scale, and the rationale behind it in terms of commoditizing what is not commoditized in the interest of neoliberal capitalism.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shahabuddin. Yeah.
Is this on? Helal, Ahmed, Economics Department, North-South University. Thank you very much for all these presentations. Quite liked it, enjoyed pretty much. First, couple of comments or questions, if you want to interpret that way. First one is on Dr. Sen's paper. This paper actually, of course, from the comments, brought forward bringing to the fore a critical development in tenancy market. So I'm come from policy background, so my question is, so what? The question would be for policymakers, is it a good development for raising the productivity in agriculture? Is it a positive development in bridging the gap between the productivity gap between Bangladesh and other comparable countries? So that could be quite interesting one, and I thought he covered a lot of implications of his research, but that could be an important one. With regard to the second presenter on livestock, if I have picked up correctly, I thought the Indian case studies based on two very regulated areas, states, are the representative of India's overall livestock practices. If not, then comparing with Bangladeshi's broad-based results could be a bit unfair. So, and so when you're making comparison, we would like to see Indian results and compare it with Bangladeshi results as a whole. On that front, on the negative rate of returns, I understand those two states have got multiple production from livestock production, including religious aspect. So there are co-productions, and some of them cannot be monetized. So is that the reason why they're happy with the negative returns? Some comments or insights into those things. Thank you.
Okay, I think that is the last question. I think I'll take, because I have to take some time, need some time to give the authors to respond, I think, if they like to. Binayak, first.
I agree with most of the comments, and I was not so sure that whether a dynamic story can be told from a repeat cross-sectional data. So I tried to do this for 2000 HS, for 2010 and 2016, and got similar results, but using a narrower probit model who gives, who takes, and trying to understand from the determinants of the decisions to give or decisions to take, that to identify some factors which are dynamic in nature, like expansion of salaried employment, the remittance penetration into the village life, or migration income, or for instance the female-headed sheep, or for that matter the microfinance availability of that. So both from the, but these factors are structural, but how to capture it in a econometric quantitative way on a repeat cross-section data, I consulted the literature and I actually presented its findings in the Asia Research a limited version of it, minus 2016 HIS last year. So also got similar sort of comments. Yeah. So, okay. So that is one approach which I am not taking. So that's something who are doing macro, CG, that kind of approach, fine. But from a partial equilibrium analysis, identifying the factors that may be considered as a correlate, I was very careful not to, actually not to use the word determinant even. You use the word determinant, but I say it somewhere all through my slides, the correlate of fact, who gives and who takes. So that is a limitation of the study, and I would agree with it, and hopefully the journal which has received this paper will eventually publish it. And the other, Shopun Bhai's comments is very important. I agree that I have been a little bit less careful about using the state versus market. I understand that institutions such as microfinance or even the mechanized service market is not fully market-driven forces, although it is mostly market-driven forces that enable the landless households to access those services such as, which was to replace the draft animal power or irrigation. It is also supported somewhat by the government because there are some issues, but in the main, yes. So mostly the comments by Dr. Helal, Dr. Samiul and others, I agree, and two comments I take it for the further works. One is to look at what are the determinants of the forms of rent depending on the riskiness of the agricultural condition. Secondly, what types of output is being produced. That is the comment which came up, a couple of discussants made. The comments, what type of produce are being recorded in the landless tenants agriculture as opposed to general agriculture. Then we will have a better understanding of this, of some of the problems mentioned. Thank you very much for the comments.
A couple of minutes. Thank you. I will respond first to the chair's comment. The average revenue, it comes from the equation on slide 13. So it's actually percentage because you have, in the numerator, we have the profit and asset value divided by value of livestock. So it's the percentage profit. And we estimated both Cobb-Douglas CES and linear production function, but we here only reported the CES production function. This other comments, I'll just respond to. I mean, there were not really comments. I mean, that the poorer households have lower return. It's just big, as I said, because their cattle maybe stunted. It's really low value cows. I mean, So it generates less revenue, at the same time its asset value is also low. Though that's not given in the data, I would guess so why that is the case. All I can say, that's what we see in the data. I can't give you any explanation. One probable explanation is something which I have just provided. The other aspect, nutritional security insurance, I agree with you, there's no dispute with that. The comment from this gentleman from North-South University is interesting. I mean, we have the same problem that in India, they are not representative, but to have a representative Indian data on cattle is something expecting too much. The variation is too much. But if you look at the legal aspect of slaughtering, I mean, most Indian states will give you similar results. If you, as I said, if you take out eastern states, Kerala and West Bengal, and do the same study and the rest of the states, then you might explain Bangladeshi results well. Otherwise, for most of 70% of Indian states in terms of slaughtering act is very close to Andhra Pradesh, because informally there could be very strict rules. Even in Andhra Pradesh, in villages, cattle are slaughtered in an informal way. There are Muslim butchers who do it. And there are NGOs who work for these people who eat beef. So the point is valid, but I would say that at this moment we can't compare. And since we, as I said, the main point is for most of the states, the result will be valid, I think, in my judgment. This last point he was making about the religious value of cattle, I think I don't believe in these things, and most economists who are participating in this debate don't believe in that. If 42, 43 of the households have cattle, and do you think if everybody is a pious Hindu? That's not the case. If you look at in Indian villages and towns, like Indian census data provide figure on stray cow. That's a very good category called stray cow. These are the cows you can see on the streets, although they are mostly located in rural areas. So if they really had feeling, this kind of holy cow feeling, they would not have left the cows on the road, damaging other crops, things like that. So it could be the case, I don't know, but I strongly believe you should look at it from an economics perspective, where you must ask if something doesn't give you value, why you retain that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Helal Bhai, for providing some useful comments. So about the price transmission, we would say that this is not actually magnified, but we can do this asymmetric transmission. But what we are saying that, okay, when there is a price, there is a export ban imposed in India, right then the export is actually increased. The minimum export price is set is so high that they stop exporting to Bangladesh. So this is not exactly price transmission, the effect of the shock, instantaneous shock, but for other things like the asymmetric transmission from Indian price to Bangladesh, we can do it. And for other things like the observing the change in margin over time, probably that was not possible with the given like the cross-section information on the margin. And Dr. Samiul Hoque's comments on the title of the paper, that whether we can say that we can assess the competition in the market this way. So our approach is backed by one paper by De Leon and Gamble in 2017 AJE. So this is very common in especially the sub-Saharan Africa, where there is huge volatility in the food market. So price for up to like 2005, the price transmission, like the price behavior, that was the main indicator of assessing competition. But over time, they have incorporated other things from the definition of competitive market to understand about the market structure. So I think there are other ways other than the structural estimation and the conduct parameter estimation, which was beyond the scope of our approach and given our resources. But with the price transmission, I think we can still talk about the competitiveness of the market. Thank you.
Now, thank you, Mainul, and now Prasad.
Thanks for the two comments that have been made, one by Shahabuddin Bhai, the other from over there. Both are, in a sense, I would say, have to wait till the BBS releases its full set of data. But the proposition that has been made by Shahabuddin Bhai, the correlation does not mean causation. I think whether the two types of mobility are correlated, that would be a very interesting finding and very interesting implications for the development of the society that we have. Thank you very much.
Well, I think this almost brings to the conclusion of this session. It's almost 1:25. The organizer told me to close it 1:15. So I'm lagging behind by 7 minutes. But I think I also made my tidbit comments, I think, after the presentation of the paper. In general, I like to say that all these 4 papers were on diversified topic, ranging from land tenancy to return to cattle market, and then competition in the onion market, and finally the female mobility, the income scale and physical mobility. And they were all, to my opinion, rich in presentation. Some are first of their kind, and some are not so, but again, there is scope of improvement, as we have heard from the comments from the designated discussions. And from the response of the authors, I think they will take those into consideration, and they have also assured us that they will at least incorporate some of the comments that they consider relevant from their point of view. So I think with this comment, let me just close the remark. But before that, I should thank BIDS for inviting me to chair the session, and I'll thank the paper presenter, the designated discussion, and all those who have participated from the floor in discussion. So thank you again, and I conclude this session. Thank you.